Sarah Washington's heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor of the courthouse, each step echoing through the high-ceilinged corridor. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across her path. She checked her watch. 8:45 a.m. In 45 minutes, she needed to be back at her office preparing for a crucial federal appeals case. The traffic court waiting area buzzed with quiet conversation as people from all walks of life sat shoulder to shoulder on worn wooden benches. Sarah smoothed her charcoal gray Armani suit and took a seat, pulling out her phone to review case notes while she waited. Her Harvard Law ring caught the fluorescent light as she scrolled through emails from her legal team. A young intern from her firm had dropped off the morning's case files at her house, but Sarah insisted on handling this minor traffic matter personally. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Handle small things with the same excellence as big things. The memory brought a slight smile to her face as she thought of the basement apartment where she'd grown up, watching her mother meticulously iron court clerk uniforms. Docket number 247, the bailiff called out. Sarah rose gracefully, gathering her belongings. As she approached the bench, Judge Michael Barrett continued writing in his ledger, not bothering to look up. The scene before him was routine, one of dozens of traffic cases he would process that morning. State your name for the record, Judge Barrett said flatly, his tone suggesting both boredom and mild irritation at the morning's endless procession of cases. Sarah Elizabeth Washington, Your Honor. Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms far more prestigious than this one. She stood perfectly poised, hands clasped loosely in front of her, exhibiting the same presence she used when arguing before federal judges. Judge Barrett finally glanced up, but his eyes immediately returned to his papers. Ms. Washington, you're charged with making an improper turn at a red light. How do you plead? Guilty with an explanation, Your Honor. Sarah began to reach into her briefcase for documentation, showing construction had obscured the no turn on red sign, but the judge waved his hand dismissively. The fine is $175. Pay the clerk on your way out. He picked up his gavel, ready to move on to the next case. Sarah opened her mouth to present her evidence but thought better of it. This wasn't about winning. It was about respect for the process, even when the process didn't seem to respect you back. She had 3 clerks and a corner office waiting for her upstairs in the federal courthouse, but here she was just another face in the crowd. Thank you, Your Honor, she said clearly, gathering her things. As she turned to leave, a young law student who had been observing the proceedings for a class assignment caught her eye. Sarah gave her a warm smile, remembering her own days of courthouse observations. Later that morning, as Sarah settled into her office overlooking the city skyline, her paralegal rushed in with news about their upcoming federal case. Neither of them could have imagined that in a few months, that brief traffic court appearance would become a turning point in American legal history. On Judge Barrett's desk, Sarah's case file sat closed, her Harvard Law credentials and impressive legal career unnoticed among the morning's paperwork. The nameplate before him gleamed in the morning light, a silent witness to a moment that would soon become legendary in legal circles across the nation. The afternoon sun painted golden rectangles across Sarah Washington's office walls, illuminating rows of leather-bound law books and carefully framed achievements. Her corner office on the 32nd floor offered a sweeping view of the city she'd grown to love, but today she barely noticed the scenery. Her mind was focused on the stack of briefs before her, each page representing another step toward educational equality. Ms. Washington. Her assistant Michael knocked softly before entering. CNN is on line 3, and Professor Chen from Yale Law wants to know if you can guest lecture next month on constitutional interpretation. He paused, checking his tablet. Oh, and your pro bono client from the education access case is here early. Sarah glanced at the solid mahogany grandfather clock in the corner, a gift from her mother when she made partner. Send her in, Michael, and please reschedule CNN for tomorrow. This meeting takes priority. Moments later, 16-year-old Maya Thompson entered the office, clutching her backpack. The girl's eyes widened as she took in the panoramic views and prestigious awards, but Sarah's warm smile quickly put her at ease. "Have a seat, Maya." Sarah gestured to the comfortable leather chair across from her desk. "Tell me how your college applications are going." She moved to her office's sitting area, deliberately choosing to sit beside rather than across from her young client. Maya's face lit up as she pulled out her laptop. "I got into 3 schools already. And the admission officer at Princeton said your letter of recommendation was one of the most compelling she'd ever read." Sarah beamed with genuine pride. Maya's case had started as a challenge to unfair advanced placement testing practices, but had evolved into a mentorship that reminded Sarah of her own journey. On her desk, a photo showed a younger Sarah standing with her middle school guidance counselor, the first person who told her she could become a lawyer. Their meeting was interrupted by Michael again. "I'm sorry, but the president of the Bar Association is requesting an urgent call about your education equity initiative." "Tell him I'll call back in 30 minutes, Sarah replied without hesitation. "Maya and I aren't quite finished here." After reviewing Maya's college essays and sharing application strategies, Sarah walked her young client to the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the polished brass, no longer the nervous law student who once doubted she belonged in these halls. Returning to her office, Sarah rolled up her sleeves and dove back into preparation for tomorrow's federal court appearance. Her legal team had assembled in the conference room next door, their voices carrying through the glass as they debated legal precedents. On her desk, her phone buzzed continuously. The morning's traffic court incident was far from her mind as she focused on the groundbreaking education access case that could affect thousands of students like Maya. Each carefully crafted argument in her brief represented another crack in the ceiling she was determined to shatter. As evening approached, Sarah's secretary placed a fresh cup of coffee on her desk. "The New York Times is still holding, and Harvard Law Review wants to publish your article on educational equity." Sarah nodded, making a few final notes on her brief. The city lights began twinkling outside her window, but her day was far from over. In a few hours, she would head home to her apartment, where more case files awaited review. Excellence, she had learned, was not a destination but a continuous journey. Little did she know that her next journey would take her far beyond this office, these cases, and even her wildest dreams. But for now, she remained focused on the task at hand, her mother's words guiding every decision. Excellence speaks for itself. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled Sarah Washington's kitchen as morning light filtered through her apartment windows. It was Sunday, her designated day for making her mother's famous blueberry pancakes, a tradition that kept her grounded despite her rising prominence in the legal world. The sizzle of butter on the griddle provided a gentle soundtrack to her morning routine. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop. Usually, she let calls go to voicemail on Sunday mornings, but something made her glance at the screen. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID. "White House office." "Sarah Washington speaking," she answered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Please hold for the President of the United States," a professional voice responded. Sarah placed her spatula down carefully, moving away from the stove. The pancake on the griddle began to brown around the edges, forgotten in the moment that was about to change her life. "Ms. Washington." The president's warm voice filled her kitchen. "I hope I'm not interrupting your Sunday morning." "Not at all, Mr. President," she replied, gripping the counter's edge for support. "I'll get straight to the point. Justice Reynolds has announced his retirement, and after careful consideration, I would like to nominate you to fill his seat on the Supreme Court." The world seemed to pause. Through her window, Sarah could see the cherry blossom tree she planted 5 years ago when she made partner. Its pink petals danced in the morning breeze, oblivious to the historic moment unfolding beside it. "This nomination," the president continued, "represents not just your exceptional legal mind and dedication to justice, but also your unique understanding of how our laws affect everyday Americans." Sarah found her voice. "Mr. President, I am deeply honored." The pancake was now smoking slightly. but she barely noticed. Across town, Judge Michael Barrett settled into his favorite armchair, remote in hand and evening coffee on the side table. His wife called from the kitchen, asking if he wanted dinner, but his attention was caught by the breaking news banner flashing across his television screen. Breaking news: President to nominate Sarah Washington for Supreme Court. The coffee cup halted midway to his lips as her photo appeared on screen. Recognition dawned slowly, then hit him like a thunderbolt. It was her, the woman from traffic court just months ago. The same woman he barely looked at, whose evidence he dismissed without consideration. The news anchor's voice filled his living room. Sarah Washington, a brilliant legal mind known for her groundbreaking work in educational equity and civil rights, is set to become the newest nominee for the Supreme Court. Her track record includes. Judge Barrett leaned forward, absorbing every detail. Each accomplishment mentioned felt like a personal rebuke. Harvard Law Review editor, distinguished federal prosecutor, partner at a prestigious firm, architect of landmark educational access cases. His wife entered the room, noting his intense focus. "Michael, everything okay?" He couldn't find the words to explain how this moment was shaking his professional foundation. On screen, Sarah stood at a podium, her Harvard Law ring visible as she adjusted her notes, the same ring he'd failed to notice in his courtroom. The president's voice returned to Sarah's kitchen. "The formal announcement will be at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Your country needs you, Ms. Washington. Are you ready to serve?" Looking at the now burnt pancake, Sarah smiled. Her mother's favorite saying echoed in her mind. When preparation meets opportunity, magic happens. "Yes, Mr. President," she answered. "I'm ready to serve." Morning light streamed through the windows of every major news studio in America as producers scrambled to gather footage of Sarah Washington's legal career. Her story had captured the nation's imagination, not just for her brilliant legal mind, but for the remarkable path that led her to this moment. "Good morning, America," the cheerful host began. "Today we're taking a deeper look at Supreme Court nominee Sarah Washington's journey. We've uncovered footage of her arguing a landmark education case just last month. The screen filled with Sarah's image, commanding attention in a federal courthouse. Her voice rang clear and passionate. Education is not just a privilege for some, but a fundamental right for all. The Constitution demands nothing less." In his chambers, Judge Barrett watched the coverage unfold on his small desktop monitor. His morning docket sat untouched as clip after clip revealed the legal giant he failed to recognize in his own courtroom. "And here's something remarkable," another news anchor announced. "Former students of Ms. Washington are sharing stories of her impact on their lives." The screen switched to Maya Thompson, now a confident young woman in a Princeton University sweatshirt. "Ms. Washington didn't just win my case," Maya spoke with emotion. "She showed up to my debate championships. She reviewed my college essays. She taught me that excellence isn't about being perfect. It's about never stopping until you've done your absolute best." Social media platforms buzzed with activity. Hashtag Sarah Washington and hashtag #SupremExcellence trended worldwide. Law students shared photos of Sarah's guest lectures, her words becoming instant inspiration. The law is not just about precedent, it's about possibility. In her temporary office at the White House Preparation Center, Sarah maintained her focus despite the media whirlwind. Her team had created a wall of sticky notes covering key cases and potential questions. Yet her eyes kept drifting to a simple framed photo on the desk, her mother standing proudly in her court clerk uniform. "Ms. Washington," her aide interrupted gently, "The Late Show wants to do a segment on your journey. They're particularly interested in the traffic court incident." Sarah looked up from her preparation materials. "Tell them yes, but only if we can focus on the larger message. This isn't about one moment or one judge. It's about seeing the potential in every person who walks into a courtroom." Meanwhile, Judge Barrett's wife found him in his study late that evening, surrounded by years of his court records. "Michael, you've been in here for hours," she said softly. "I keep thinking about how many others I might have missed," he replied, his voice heavy with reflection. How many Sarah Washingtons have sat before me, and I never truly saw them. The next morning, a small legal blog published an interview with Sarah's former professor. What makes Sarah exceptional isn't just her brilliance, it's her ability to rise above personal slights and focus on systemic change. She once told me, "Every obstacle is an opportunity to show others the way forward." As the sun set on another day of intense media coverage, Sarah stood at her office window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Her phone buzzed with another media request, but her attention was drawn to an email from a young girl in Detroit. "Dear Ms. Washington, today my teacher asked what I want to be when I grow up. Thanks to you, I dared to say Supreme Court Justice. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Sarah smiled, thinking of her own childhood dreams. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more preparation, more scrutiny. But tonight, she savored the knowledge that somewhere, a young girl was daring to dream bigger, because she had dared first. The Senate hearing room hummed with anticipation as Sarah Washington took her seat at the polished wooden table. Cameras clicked rapidly, their sounds echoing off the ornate ceiling. Her mother sat in the front row, wearing her Sunday best, hands folded quietly in her lap. They had shared breakfast that morning, just as they had on Sarah's first day of law school, her mother serving eggs and wisdom in equal measure. "Ms. Washington," the committee chairman began, adjusting his glasses, "your legal credentials are impressive. Harvard Law Review, distinguished career in private practice, numerous precedent-setting cases. But today, I'd like to start with a different story, one that's captured public attention." Sarah knew what was coming. She had prepared for this moment with the same thoroughness she brought to every legal brief. "Could you tell us about your experience in traffic court earlier this year? Many are curious about your perspective on that incident." The room fell silent. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised. Sarah's mother straightened almost imperceptibly in her seat. "Mr. Chairman," Sarah began, her voice clear and measured. "That morning in traffic court reminded me of something essential about our justice system. Every interaction matters. Every moment is an opportunity to uphold the dignity of the law." She paused, taking a sip of water. "I could focus on not being recognized, but I prefer to focus on recognition. Recognizing that our legal system works best when everyone, from traffic court to the Supreme Court, is treated with equal respect and consideration." A senator from the opposite party leaned forward. "But surely you must have felt." "What I felt," Sarah interjected gently, "was gratitude for the lesson my mother taught me long ago. She worked as a court clerk for 30 years, and she always said, 'Excellence isn't about who recognizes you. It's about who you choose to be when no one's looking.'" In the audience, her mother's eyes glistened with pride. The questioning continued, moving to constitutional interpretation and judicial philosophy. Sarah's responses displayed not just technical expertise, but a deep understanding of how legal decisions affect real lives. On the matter of educational access, she explained, responding to another senator's query, "We must consider not just precedent, but possibility. The Constitution is a living document that challenges us to create a more perfect union with each generation." During a brief recess, the chairman overheard two junior staffers discussing the proceedings. "She's not just answering their questions," one whispered, "she's teaching a masterclass in judicial wisdom." The afternoon session brought more challenging questions about her past cases and legal philosophy. Sarah remained poised, her responses thoughtful and nuanced. When questioned about her approach to difficult decisions, she shared a story about her first major case. "I represented a small community fighting for educational resources," she recalled. "The easy path would have been to settle for minor concessions, but sometimes justice requires us to take the harder road, to fight for what's right, rather than what's convenient." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the hearing room's tall windows, the chairman made one final request. "Ms. Washington, what would you say to that traffic court judge today?" Sarah smiled warmly. "I would thank him. Sometimes our most important lessons come from unexpected moments." In that brief interaction, I was reminded why I became a lawyer, to ensure that every person who enters a courtroom feels seen, heard, and treated with dignity. The room fell silent again, but this time with reverence. Even her strongest critics found themselves nodding in quiet agreement. Judge Michael Barrett sat at his desk well past midnight, the courthouse long since emptied of its daily bustle. His desk lamp cast a warm glow over scattered papers, transcripts from years of cases, notes from recent hearings, and a fresh legal pad bearing multiple crossed-out attempts at writing a single letter. He glanced at the framed photo on his wall, taken the day he was sworn in as a judge. 20 years of service, and only now was he beginning to understand the true weight of his position. The television in the corner silently played clips from Sarah Washington's confirmation hearings, her poised responses a stark contrast to his hurried dismissal months ago. "Dear Ms. Washington," he began writing again, then paused. The formal address felt wrong somehow. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper. "Dear Justice Washington," he wrote, then continued with steadier hands. "You won't remember me as clearly as I now remember you. I was the traffic court judge who failed to offer you the basic courtesy of full attention that morning. While you graciously used that moment to teach others about dignity in our justice system, I've been learning my own profound lessons. Your confirmation hearings prompted me to review 20 years of cases. I discovered patterns I'd never noticed before. Quick judgments, interrupted explanations, moments where efficiency trumped empathy. Each case number represents a person who deserved better. Yesterday, a young woman appeared in my courtroom for a minor offense. Like you, she carried a briefcase full of carefully prepared documents. Unlike that day with you, I listened. She was a nursing student working night shifts, and her documentation showed valid reasons for her situation. That 10-minute hearing changed her life and reminded me why I became a judge. He paused, watching Sarah on the silent television screen as she answered questions with grace and wisdom. The night janitor passed by, nodding respectfully through the glass office door. Your example has inspired me to initiate changes in our local court system. Starting next month, we're implementing new training programs focusing on comprehensive listening and awareness. Every judge in our district will participate, beginning with me. But more importantly, you've reminded me that true justice requires us to see the person behind each case number. It requires us to remember that every individual who enters our courtroom carries their own story, their own dreams, their own potential to shape our nation's future. I don't write seeking forgiveness. Your recent comments made it clear you've moved beyond that moment with remarkable grace. Instead, I write to thank you. Your response to our brief interaction has transformed not just my approach to the bench, but my understanding of justice itself. Watching you educate the Senate committee about the importance of dignity in our justice system, I felt both humbled and hopeful. Humbled by my past oversights, but hopeful about the changes one moment of recognition can inspire. You spoke of your mother's wisdom about excellence regardless of recognition. Today, I share that wisdom with every new judge I mentor, adding your example as proof of its truth. Judge Barrett laid down his pen, reading over the words. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky. On his desk, tomorrow's docket waited. 23 cases, 23 stories, 23 opportunities to do better. He signed the letter and carefully folded it into an envelope. Tomorrow, he would mail it to the Supreme Court nominee's office. But tonight, he began revising his court's procedural guidelines, determined that no other Sarah Washington would ever go unheard in his courtroom again. The grand ballroom of the National Judicial Conference buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of judges, lawyers, and legal scholars filled the rows of seats, their conversations creating a gentle murmur beneath the crystal chandeliers. At the podium, Justice Sarah Washington adjusted the microphone, her Supreme Court justice pin catching the light. Today, she began, her voice warm and clear. I have the honor of introducing someone who transformed a brief moment into a movement for change. She paused, looking toward the side of the stage. Please welcome Judge Michael Barrett. The audience's applause was polite but curious. Few knew why a local traffic court judge would share the stage with a Supreme Court justice at this prestigious conference on judicial reform. Judge Barrett emerged from the wings, looking both dignified and humbled in his best suit. 6 months ago, Sarah continued, I received a letter that reminded me why I love our legal system. Not for its perfection, but for its capacity to grow. She drew the carefully preserved letter from a folder. Judge Barrett wrote words that would inspire changes in courtrooms across our nation. Judge Barrett reached the podium, and Sarah stepped aside, giving him the floor. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his reading glasses. When Justice Washington appeared in my traffic court, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I was so focused on efficiency that I forgot about humanity. But her response to that moment taught me more about justice than 20 years on the bench. The room fell silent, every ear tuned to this unexpected story. Since that day, he continued, our district has implemented what we call the Washington Protocol. Every case, no matter how minor, receives full attention. Every person, regardless of circumstances, deserves to be heard. Sarah returned to the podium, standing beside him. Judge Barrett's letter arrived during my confirmation process. While others focused on that morning's oversight, his words focused on tomorrow's opportunities. Together, they shared how the Washington Protocol had reduced appeals by 40%. More importantly, public trust in the local courts had soared. Small claims court judges reported higher satisfaction rates, and legal aid organizations noted improved experiences for their clients. Excellence, Sarah said, turning to Judge Barrett, isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what we learn from them. The judge nodded, adding, and justice isn't just about the law. It's about the dignity we offer each person who seeks it. During the question and answer session, a young law clerk raised her hand. Justice Washington, given your position now, what would you say to that younger version of yourself in traffic court? Sarah smiled warmly. I would tell her that sometimes the most important legal precedents aren't set in Supreme Court chambers. They're set in traffic courts, small claims courts, and local jurisdictions where most Americans experience our justice system. Judge Barrett added, and I would tell my younger self that true justice requires not just knowledge of the law, but awareness of our shared humanity. As the session ended, the audience rose in a standing ovation. But the most powerful moment came after, when cameras caught Sarah and Judge Barrett talking with a group of law students, sharing their story of how one small interaction sparked a national conversation about dignity in the justice system. Later, as they stood in the empty ballroom, Judge Barrett turned to Sarah. Thank you for turning my mistake into a message of hope. Sarah smiled, thinking of her mother's words about excellence speaking for itself. Thank you, she replied, for showing that it's never too late to listen. 5 years into her Supreme Court tenure, Justice Sarah Washington's chambers buzzed with the energy of a new term. Law clerks moved purposefully through the book-lined room, preparing for upcoming cases. Among the carefully arranged photographs on her desk sat a new addition, a simple frame holding a traffic ticket, now yellowed with age, displayed alongside a more recent image of her and Judge Barrett addressing a graduating class at Harvard Law. Justice Washington. Her senior clerk knocked gently. The high school students from Detroit are here for their tour. Sarah smiled, remembering her own first visit to these halls. She gathered her robes and stepped into the hallway where 30 eager faces waited. Among them stood Maya Thompson, now a first-year law student serving as their mentor through a program Sarah had inspired. Welcome to the Supreme Court, Sarah began, leading them into her chambers. Every item in this room tells a story about justice. She paused by the framed ticket, including this one. The students gathered around as she shared the tale that had become required reading in law schools across the country. Maya, having heard it many times, still smiled at her favorite parts. Meanwhile, across town, Judge Barrett sat in his newly designed courtroom. The traditional elevated bench had been modified, lowered slightly to create better eye contact with those appearing before him. The Washington Protocol, now implemented in jurisdictions nationwide, had transformed how local courts operated. A young judge in training observed his proceedings as part of the new judicial orientation program. She watched as he handled each case with careful attention, no matter how minor the infraction. During a break, she noticed him writing in a journal, a practice he'd maintained since that pivotal day with Sarah. Every person who enters this courtroom, he explained to the trainee, might be the next Justice Washington. But more importantly, every person deserves to be treated as if they are. Back at the Supreme Court, Sarah concluded the students' tour in the Great Hall. A girl raised her hand, pointing to a newly installed exhibition about milestones in judicial history. There, prominently displayed, was the story of a traffic court interaction that had sparked a national movement for judicial reform. Justice Washington, the student asked, "Did you ever imagine that morning would lead to all this?" Sarah thought about her mother's court clerk uniform, now preserved in the Smithsonian's collection. She thought about Maya's journey from pro bono client to law student, and about Judge Barrett's transformation from a moment of oversight to a champion of judicial reform. "The beauty of justice," she replied, "is that it grows through every interaction, every decision, every moment we choose to see each other's humanity." That evening, as the sun set over Washington, D.C., Sarah received a message from Judge Barrett. His courthouse had just graduated its 100th class of judges trained in the Washington Protocol. Attached was a photo of his latest graduating class, each member holding a copy of the handbook they'd written together. Every case counts, building trust through judicial dignity. Sarah opened her desk drawer and pulled out Judge Barrett's original letter, its creases soft from years of being read. Below his signature, she'd written her mother's words. "Excellence speaks for itself." In courtrooms across America, from the highest chambers to the smallest traffic courts, their story had become more than a lesson in judicial reform. It was a reminder that justice, at its heart, is about seeing the potential in every person who seeks it. As she prepared to leave for the day, Sarah straightened the framed ticket on her wall. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to uphold the dignity of the law. But tonight, she savored the knowledge that somewhere, in a traffic court much like the one where her story began, someone was being truly seen, heard, and respected. And that had made all the difference.